Trading for Myles Garrett or Cooper Kupp is very unlikely for the New Orleans Saints, but if I had to pull the trigger for one, it would be Cooper Kupp. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at Kyle McCord, the Syracuse quarterback who might be worth a roll of the dice in this year's draft and what it could mean for a passer that the New Orleans Saints reportedly really like in Spencer Rattler. We'll also take a look at some of the comments that I got from some anonymous media members who have covered Kellen Moore and what they think about him as a leader, the good and the bad. We'll dive into all that. And we're going to kick everything off with two possible trade targets this offseason. Big names, edge rusher Myles Garrett and wide receiver Cooper Kupp could be on the move. And while you might say that either trade would be unlikely, I want to tell you why I would still check in with the Rams on Cooper Kupp. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you, whether it's your first time or your next time, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app, create an account, and you're going to be able to use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Make sure you go and check them out over at Prize Picks. Today's episode, I want to kick off with the pursuit or potential pursuit of a couple of big names that are set to hit the trade market, or at least for teams to hear out some trade offers from other teams. Edge rusher Myles Garrett, as well as wide receiver Cooper Kupp. Now, if you haven't seen this, I'll explain why both of these guys are considered to potentially be on the move here soon. But let me tell you first that the pursuit of Myles Garrett, I feel like, would be an empty one if you're the New Orleans Saints. You don't really have the draft capital to give up for him. You don't really have the money to pay him or to help to move him. But wide receiver Cooper Kupp could be a name that the New Orleans Saints could be and should be willing to check in on at the right price, and if the Rams are willing to do the right thing to help it all happen. And both of those boxes may actually be checked. So here's the deal. Myles Garrett has asked for a trade, says that he wants to win a championship, but doesn't believe that he's going to be able to do that in Cleveland. And so from Cleveland to Canton, he wants his opportunity to get out and get to a contender. So I would expect teams like the Detroit Lions, team like the two teams we're about to watch this weekend, the Philadelphia Eagles, as well as the Kansas City Chiefs, I know that they're within the division, so very unlikely, but I would expect at least for the Baltimore Ravens to check in and see, hey, what would it cost, including the in-division tax? But it's not a place that I see the New Orleans Saints going. However, I could see the New Orleans Saints at least checking in on Cooper Kupp. And you might say, well, Ross, he's got a $20+ million cap hit in 2025, $20+ million cap hit in 2026. He's not as good as he once was. He's not the Cooper Kupp that caught 140, plus receptions a few years ago. He's not that guy. He didn't look great up against or for Los Angeles last year. I get all that. I truly do. I really, really understand that. Like, you look at Cooper Kupp's numbers as a receiver and you can see everything kind of falling off and everything throughout the seasons. You're probably trading for a guy you're going to get 12 games out of, but are those 12 games enough to make it worth it? I mean, you look at over the course of the past few years when it comes to what it is that he's been doing, and he's still been somebody that the team has relied upon, the team has looked to get the ball to. He just hasn't had the same level of production. In 2021, he led the league with 145 receptions and nearly cracked 2,000 receiving yards at 1947. And since then, 812 receiving yards, 737 receiving yards, 710 receiving yards, having played just 12 games in 12 games in 2023 and 2024, 9 games in 2022. After that incredible 2021 season, in which he played all 17 games, was targeted a whopping 191 times in the process. So you're not moving for a Cooper Kupp to try to get 2021 Cooper Kupp. You're moving for a Cooper Kupp in order to get a do-it-all, dirty work wide receiver 2, a Traquan Smith with much more value and upside. And honestly, you're trying to get somebody like Cooper Kupp because he's absolutely, and I'm just going to say it this way, peeved when it comes to how things have been handled with him and the Los Angeles Rams. He said basically that he always wanted to be in LA. He wanted to stay in LA. He wanted to finish his career in LA, and that he's basically going to bring a lot of heat now if he does, and as he does get moved. Now, he's not asking for a trade, but he was basically taking to social media and the Notes app announcing that the expectation is that he will be traded by the Los Angeles Rams. So this feels like more of a team decision than his. In fact, in his note, he even said that he doesn't want it. Like, it's not him. He doesn't want to be traded. He wants to stay in Los Angeles. And so if he does indeed go on the move, he would only go on the move for about a day 3 pick. And at the most, you're hoping and you're expecting, and in fact, according to reports, the Rams are willing to do this. They're willing to pick up some of his salary and some of his cap number. So if he's able to, or if they're able to pick up some of his base salary and then move him, and you're still able to move him for a 4th round pick at most, a 6th or a 7th round pick after. Otherwise, I'm just looking at the New Orleans Saints picks. They have no 5th round pick. I think it could be worth the move if they're gonna foot the bill. And if all it's going to cost you is a day 3 pick, then yeah, make a move for a Cooper Kupp. If nothing else, it gives you a veteran, an actual veteran in the wide receiver room that can help guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. That's not a redundant talent to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed as a speedy deep threat. He gives you somebody that's going to be able to operate in the short area, in the intermediate area, gives you a 3rd and 2 passing option, gives you a 1st and 10 or 2nd and 10 passing option to get it to 2nd and 5 or 3rd and 5. He gives you all of that. You're not looking for Cooper Kupp to come somewhere and be a superstar. That's why you're only giving up a day 3 pick to get him. And so here's the way that I would do this. If I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm monitoring the situation. If he gets traded before the draft, then he gets traded before the draft. Totally fine. That's likely to happen as teams are going to want to get him in, figure out how much of the salary cap the Rams are willing to pick up and how that impacts their free agency class and all those other things. So I would expect him to probably be moved early. And if he gets moved early, c'est la vie, right? So be it. He gets moved early, totally fine. But if he's still on the roster and they're not looking to move him until the draft, then what I would do if I'm the New Orleans Saints is wait to see what day 1 and day 2 looks like when you're on the board. If you don't walk away with a wide receiver with your 1st round pick, your 2nd round pick, or either of your either of your 3rd round picks, my apologies, and you didn't go out and sign a different wide receiver in free agency, I'd start working the phones with my 2nd, 4th round pick. And if they're not interested in that, then I'd be looking at, or I guess they would be interested in that, but I'd be shopping that 6th round pick. Then if they're not interested in that, then I'd be willing to move my 2nd, 4th round pick. Because you think about the wide receivers you could potentially get in the 4th round, you're probably picking somebody for 12 games worth of time, right? Not necessarily 12 games, but 12 games worth of snaps. And you're probably looking for somebody that might come in and you're still hoping to translate to the NFL. Remember, you've got a Bub Means that's working to do that, all those other things. So you don't have to go the redundant route. And say, go and get somebody that's proven in the NFL. Go and get somebody that's able to mentor your young wide receivers and all of those things. So that's where I would look at the potential of going after a Cooper Kupp. If he gets moved before that, he gets moved before that. If they're not interested in moving him to somebody within the conference, they're not interested in moving him to somewhere near inside the conference, totally fine. No love lost, no loss when you're not giving up anything. But that's kind of the way that I would play this. Is it unlikely? Yes. Is it worth at least looking into? Yes. And is a trade for Cooper Kupp far more likely than a trade for Myles Garrett? Absolutely. Especially as the Rams are looking to pick up the bill. And of course, Cooper Kupp's 2026 base salary, over $14 million, but $0 of it is guaranteed. So you can move off with a clean cut right after 1 season. So you'll be able to use a day 3 pick for a 1-year rental on a physical receiver that can block and that can give you another physical option as a pass catcher, and then bang, you're right out from under it. In 2026, it's a way that the New Orleans Saints could potentially go. Coming up next, I want to turn our attention back to Kellen Moore, the presumed New Orleans Saints upcoming hire at head coach. I spoke with some media members that have covered him before anonymously, and some of the quotes, some of the feedback that I got was pretty interesting. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the best place to go to buy tickets for your favorite sporting events, concerts, comedy shows, and much more. Even if you're looking to get last-minute tickets to the big game, Game Time is the place to go. And with Game Time picks, buying tickets for your favorite events just got even easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app actually goes through and does all the work for you. It curates the best deals so that you don't have to flip through thousands of ticket options, and instead you get the best deals right away. Add that in with things like the Super Deal, which is a prime seat. You can't believe the value that you get sometimes. You could check out things like, of course, the ability to see the view from your seat before you buy the tickets. It's awesome. It makes the ticket purchasing process so transparent. I love Game Time. You will too. So if you want to go and check them out and want to make your next event better, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family. One of our biggest question marks around Kellen Moore, who is the presumed soon-to-be New Orleans Saints head coach following the Super Bowl, is whether or not he has the leadership style that is fit to lead a team and be a leader in a locker room for an entire football team, not just on the offensive side. We know that Kellen Moore's offenses are really good. We know that Kellen Moore can call an offense. We know that Kellen Moore can adjust his offense based upon the personnel that he has and where their strengths are. However, what we don't know is whether or not he can lead a team, be a leader of men, the typical cliches that you're looking for when it is that you're looking for a head coach. So here on Super Bowl Radio Row in New Orleans, I took the time to visit with a bunch of media members from all over the places that Kellen Moore has been to kind of see what their thoughts were on Kellen Moore as a head coach. Now, I did this as an anonymous poll. That way I would make sure that I got the most genuine and most honest, right? Let's be real, honest answers for you in the midst of all this. So I'm going to read you some of the quotes that I thought were key takeaways from from some of the about dozen people that I interviewed. We're not going to go through a dozen people, but I want to do this. And I also want to play for you something that was said by Nick Sirianni, the Philadelphia Eagles head coach, who actually, unlike all of the media members that I spoke to, and unlike any of us, actually gets a chance to see what Kellen Moore is like away from the media, away from the podium, and instead behind the scenes. So one of the first people that I spoke with was very complimentary of Kellen Moore. The specific question that I asked, though, is important. What are your thoughts on Kellen Moore as a leader? Interestingly, and you're going to see this as a little bit of I'll call it a trend. The question wasn't answered directly. Instead, the answers kind of circulate and kind of formulate around opinions of Kellen Moore as an offensive mind. One media member said, quote, "You listen to him talk at the podium and there's no doubt that he has a knowledge of the game. So he knows his X's and O's. And I think that coming in and in just 1 year, sorting out and revamping what the Eagles have done or have been doing from an offensive standpoint, and stand on that still finding a way to be successful, very confusing, sorry. I think that that's a true indicator of what his players believe, and that his players believe that he does correctly." And so I think that's a unquote. I think that's a good takeaway about how good an offensive coordinator and how good a play caller Kellen Moore is, changing his offense, being an X's and O's guys, having a different personality away from the podium than in front of his players. That's something we certainly expect. There's no doubt about that. But doesn't really speak to his leadership. There's some stuff in there about him and his X's and O's and things like that. It was similar with one of the next media members that I spoke to, who said that, quote, "I think that you'll get a little bit of Mike McDaniel," which is the Miami Dolphins head coach, a very cerebral guy. He's not a yeller. He's not a loud person, but he's a great thinker. And I think that he would be great in New Orleans. He said New Orleans. New Orleans. So I get that too, right? Being a cerebral guy and everything and kind of being lost in the mind. And you'll remember that we had one person or a few people from over in the Dallas market who have also said things like, you're not surprised to find him at 3 a.m. watching tape and stuff like that. Like he's a real film junkie. He's all those things. Again, all great. but not speaking to his actual leadership. I appreciate the cerebral nature, and I appreciate the comparison to Mike McDaniel, because if you look at certain offensive coaches, they're not I want to borrow the phrase that somebody used. I think it was I can't remember who it was, and I don't want to attribute the quote incorrectly, but it was another media member that I spoke to who kind of mentioned, like, he's not like a Sean McVay, I'm going to take over the world guy, but he's certainly somebody that comes in and is able to create and generate leadership by providing opportunities for players to win games and putting them in opportunities to feel good about what it is that they're doing. So I think that there is something about the cerebral nature of his approach that's there. This one I thought was really interesting because you don't hear this very often. I love this quote, and I think this is a very positive quote for Kellen Moore. This media member said, quote, "I think that there's probably a good case to be made that Kellen Moore could be a better head coach than offensive coordinator, because I think he's been a good offensive coordinator, but it's hard to disentangle what's his versus what's Nick Sirianni's versus what it is that Jalen Hurts wants." And then, of course, I'll add in the Saquon Barkley of it all. But I think when and if he gets full control of his own vision, I think that there's a chance that he could be even better. That is a very unique standpoint. That is one that I've not heard before. We often hear about coaches that would be better coordinators than head coaches and things like that. But to hear someone remark and say that they believe that he could actually be a better head coach than coordinator, that's a really, really bold stance. And I think that that's a really, really informed stance as well. This person also highlighted that the question that hit Nick Sirianni a couple of weeks ago in Philadelphia was all about what it is that would make Kellen Moore a good head coaching hire. I want to cut to this next because I think that this is important. I can talk to all the media members that I want to, but the fact of the matter, and I can talk to all the media members that I want to, but the fact of the matter is that they're not behind the scenes. I can talk to they're not in the locker rooms, they're not in the meeting rooms, they are in the locker rooms, but they're not in the meeting rooms, they're not in the practices for those levels of practices, things like that. I can talk to all the players that I want, and the players are just going to say nice things, but listen to what Nick Sirianni had to say about Kellen Moore becoming a head coach and why he believes he would be great for the position.
Yeah, I think Kellen is very detailed in everything that he does. Very smart. Has a great, played at a very high level, has done this at a very high level, so can relate to the players and that aspect. Puts the guys in good positions to succeed. Can lead men. Is a good leader of men. As I get to sit here and watch him, install the offense, just you can see that, and you can say, man, he'd be great in front of the team. He's in front of the offense right now, but man, he'd be great in front of the entire team, inspiring the team, getting his message across to the team, coaching football to the team.
I really like that from Nick Sirianni. And one of the reasons why I like it so much is because he's one of the few people that gets to see Kellen Moore in every facet, in front of the media, away from the media, in front of the players, away from the players, in the meeting rooms, in the coaches meetings, all those other things. And so for him to talk about inspiring a team, for him to talk about being able to lead a team and being a leader of men, those are just things that we don't often get to hear. Now, you could say that Nick Sirianni is saying those things because he wants his guy to get a job, but I'm sure he would actually like to keep Kellen Moore around for more than 1 year. And just like with the players, you don't have to actually say anything nice. You just don't have to say anything not nice. And so great to hear that from Nick Sirianni. I will say that it wasn't all positive, though. One media member said to me simply, I don't see his personality as of a boisterous leader. That's why Nick Sirianni is very good in his role. And if his role, and has filled his role, and I don't see Kellen Moore as being the voice and face of a franchise. Another one told me, I'm still confused as to why he's getting head coaching discussion, but then went on to criticize the play calling, not the leadership. So this kind of goes both ways, right? Ask about the leadership, hear about the team's success, hear about the offensive scheme, hear about the system, hear about the players, get some criticism on him being a head coach, and it's still about the offensive play calling, the team success, the players. So very interesting stuff. I love being able to do this exercise. I'm going to publish a bunch of these quotes anonymously over at louisianasports.net. So make sure you go and check that piece out, which will be coming out later on today. But really, really interesting and intriguing stuff. But really the big takeaway for me is honestly what Nick Sirianni had to say about Kellen Moore. To me, that speaks volumes. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints reportedly really like Spencer Rattler, which would be no shock to anybody else, but there is another quarterback coming up in this year's draft that could be a great fit if Kellen Moore is indeed the New Orleans Saints' next head coach. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. No managing your roster through injuries, no dumb trade offers from your dumb friends. It's awesome. I absolutely love it. It's you and your football knowledge versus the house versus projections, right? It's an opportunity for you to take your football opinions, your baseball opinions, your basketball opinions, and turn them into cold, hard cash. All you got to do is choose more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, passing yards, rushing yards, things like that. Get those right. You go up to 1,000 times your entry back. And on top of all that, right now, this week in the big game, you're going to be able to get a free square because Patrick Mahomes needs to pass for only 1 passing yard in order for you to get a win. That's going to end up putting you in a situation where you just pair that with one more win and you're taking home and cashing out. Make sure you go and check them out today. Download the PrizePicks app. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints absolutely love quarterback Spencer Rattler and feel pretty good about where things are going with him. But based on what could potentially happen with a new head coach incoming, that could mean one of two things. Spencer Rattler gets a big-time opportunity in 2025, or more competition comes in, or the New Orleans Saints continue on with Derek Carr for 2025 and reevaluate the quarterback situation in 2026. So here's what I want to entertain based on a tweet from at NFL Draft Scout. This is coming from Matt Miller over at ESPN, draft analyst, talking a little bit about what it is that the New Orleans Saints feel, but what could also be interesting for them at quarterback. And one of the names that he evoked was simple. After Dan Orlovsky tweeted out and saying Kyle McCord and Kellen Moore seem like a strong fit for the Saints, Matt Moore followed that up by saying, have heard that the Saints front office loves Spencer Rattler, but this is a fun fit. McCord definitely made money this year and had a more aggressive mentality. Not with a more aggressive mentality than Spencer Rattler, but a more aggressive mentality than Kyle McCord had in the past. So where I want to start with this is Spencer Rattler. Right? I don't think there's any reason to be counting Spencer Rattler out at this point. I know he's a a polarizing person. Some people love him. Some people don't like him. I get it. It's all fine. But if you're Kellen Moore and you're coming in and you're saying, hey, I really am interested in the young talent that you have at the quarterback position, then that might be a route that the New Orleans Saints could potentially go at quarterback. They could move on from Derek Carr, either cut him, designate him post June 1, trade him if he's willing to waive his trade clause to go to a good situation. I think Bleacher Report did a speculation piece around the idea of trading him to the Pittsburgh Steelers, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Pittsburgh Steelers probably just going to bring Justin Fields back and then be good. Russell Wilson goes and reunites with Pete Carroll. Everybody happy. So we'll see exactly which way things go once Kellen Moore is in the building. But Kellen Moore was really clear that he has a lot of respect for Derek Carr, that he believes he's done some great things in the league. The both of them, it was Kellen Moore's senior year and Derek Carr's junior year, those two actually played, or sophomore year rather, those two actually played against one another, Boise State and Fresno State going up head to head, where Kellen Moore and Boise State were outstanding in that game on their way to a big win, but spoke highly of what it is that Derek Carr has done in the league. So you could easily see Kellen Moore come in and say, yeah, we'll do 2025 with Derek Carr, see how things go, and then I'll be ready to revisit the quarterback class in 2026. Nice and easy, right? Helps out your salary cap situation, all these other things, because you can restructure his deal and make a bunch of money if you want to, all those other things. So lots of stuff that could happen when it comes to Derek Carr. But if Kellen Moore comes in and says, I don't want to work with Derek Carr, I do want to work with young quarterbacks that I feel like I can develop, then certainly Spencer Rattler has to be on that list. I'm sure Jake Haener would be on that list. And then now there's this interesting conversation around Kyle McCord. Now, this is a combating name, right? Kyle McCord and Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss are the two questions that have been two quarterbacks, that have been most connected to the New Orleans Saints. As we broke down in a previous episode, you talk to media, they'll tell you that Jackson Dart's shooting up the boards. He's going to be a first-round pick. You talk to scouts, they're saying, I got a day 3, day 2 pick on the guy, or grade on the guy. So we'll see which way things go, right? It takes one head coach or one general manager to fall in love with a quarterback in the interview room at the combine, or on a top 30 visit, or at a pro day visit, or something like that. And then all of a sudden that quarterback's a first round quarterback. That's the way that the NFL works, especially how quickly everybody panics to get their quarterback. Same thing could happen with Kyle McCord, believe it or not. You have a guy in Jackson Dart who led the SEC in passing yards. You have a guy in Kyle McCord who led the nation in passing yards. There's a lot of good things to pick out of both of these quarterbacks. So we'll see where things go as the draft process rolls along. But it is really interesting because you also have very different quarterbacking styles between Spencer Rattler and Kyle McCord. So what things could be also what could make things even more interesting, going into 2025 is, let's say Kellen Moore comes in and says, I want to work with Spencer Rattler, but I want some competition for him, right? So I'm going to draft Kyle McCord. So let's play out this hypothetical in which they're both in the room together. You have one guy, Spencer Rattler, who's an incredibly good improviser, really good on the move, very good moving outside the pocket, delivering the football, those things, has some ups and downs, has some things that certainly wants to improve on, needs to improve on when it comes to his game. No doubt about it. Everybody does, especially a guy that's coming out of his first year. And a little bit more kind of mobile-esque, can move around, all those other things. Meanwhile, Kyle McCord's kind of traditional pocket passer and does it incredibly well, sees the field really well, anticipates really well, understands the ability to be able to, from what I've seen on his tape at least, deliver with, power, right? But also use touch on a deep ball and things like that. Then you look at things like turnover-worthy throws and everything. Pro Football Focus does a turnover-worthy pass percentage. Kyle McCord, if you expand it out to 31 quarterbacks across the nation in the FBS in 2024 that threw at least 450 passes, Kyle McCord's right in the middle. 3.2 turnover-worthy pass percentage. He's number 17. He's smack dab in the middle there. But then you look at the big-time throw percentage in that situation, and then all of a sudden, Kyle McCord is tied for number 3 on that very same list for best big-time throw percentage. So you can see the value there. When you have a guy like Kyle McCord that threw for 34 touchdowns and 12 interceptions, you can see where you'd like to see the turnover-worthy passes come down, but you'd like to see him maintain that more aggressive fashion that Matt Miller highlighted. He had a more aggressive mentality in 2024, and it seemed to pay off for him. Again, he led the nation in passing yards with 4,760 passing yards for the season. And so I think that there's things that you can look at here that work really well. 75.5% adjusted completion percentage that accounts for things like drops, throwaways, stuff like that. All told, 65.8% completion percentage, pretty solid, above 60%. That's what you want to see from a rookie quarterback. 6'3", 220 pounds. He is the quintessential prototype NFL size for a passer. The thing is, he doesn't move around very much. He's a pocket guy. Stands, delivers. Stands, reads, delivers. Now, that's not to say that that doesn't work. Look at Jared Goff, right? Jared Goff made it, well, I know the Detroit Lions didn't make it as far as you would like for them probably to have made it. And a lot of that was on Jared Goff's shoulders with a couple of interceptions, pick 6, all of that in those games, or in that game against the Washington Commanders. But I think that it is really interesting in terms of what that conversation could potentially be of two conflicting styles, or not conflicting styles, but diametrically opposed styles, right? Different styles, competing in the same system and competing with one another. Who wins out? So it could be really interesting. I think the highlight of this too, though, is the idea that the New Orleans Saints front office loves Spencer Rattler. I think that that's really, really important, because that would mean that if Kellen Moore comes in and says, you know what, I don't really want to work with Derek Carr, but I'd like to see what I can do with Spencer Rattler, it doesn't sound like the front office, in that case, if they truly love Spencer Rattler, would stop him from doing that. And we know that, right? The New Orleans Saints want to give their incoming head coach the chance to make his decision in terms of who the quarterback's going to be, especially in 2025. Whatever quarterback, if you pick a quarterback that's already here, That's not your quarterback unless you decide that that's your quarterback, right? You can write that off and say, well, wait, that wasn't my quarterback. I want to go get my quarterback now and then be able to move things along. So it is an interesting thought experiment. I think Kyle McCord, probably a better gamble right now. We'll see how the rest of the draft process, continues. But I would say Kyle McCord, for me, my money right now, better gamble than Jackson Dart at this time. We'll see how things continue to roll along, but really, really interesting. NFL size, NFL arm. Hey, again, I told you, I'm not an outlier guy, right? I don't want the guy that doesn't have the NFL arm. I don't want the guy that doesn't have the NFL size, but they can do these things well. No. NFL size, NFL arm, give me that. That's where I am. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, I spoke with Blake Grupe on Radio Row on Tuesday, so I'll include that. We talked a little bit about Rizzy. We talked a little bit more about kind of his 2024 and got the lowdown on what it's really like to have that other kicker breathing down your neck on the roster. So we'll dive into that and, of course, more information as we get it over on Super Bowl Radio Row on what's going on with the New Orleans Saints head coaching search. We'll continue to keep you up to date there. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. I'm not a family zone. Know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.